Long ago on Earth, an unknown element fell. It engulfed the planet, blocked the exothermic processes of the atmosphere, fire, electricity, nuclear energy. All energy sources stopped. Cars, airplanes, heating systems, production and the food transport system were stopped. Even so, the biggest problem for order was the loss of weapons. Governments lost control. Criminals and mafias did what they wanted. Without the help of modern technology, there were very few places suitable for human survival. There was a huge place loved by many and fought for by all, the upper zone. Humans found a way to acquire even more power, taking over that place. Those who did not lived in hostile areas, fleeing from the strongest. Even so, not all hope was lost. A light of fire and an unparalleled team, they were about to change the world. Now we are in the past, just 5 years after the world ran out of power. In this shelter in a hostile area, people were sheltering, trying to survive. Our protagonist was this boy. His name is Rai. He was suffering from a disease. She was his mother. Unfortunately, there was no water. It hadn't rained for a long time, and the mafias took what little water they had. Here they make it clear that it was definitely not better to get caught by the mafias. They used civilians for their experiments, forcing them to take pills that made you more powerful. But it was almost impossible to survive. But today a soldier knocked on the door. He brought medicines and supplies. The boss thinks that even if he was from the mafia, as long as he was only one, they could beat him. They also urgently needed the medicines, so they opened the doors and let him in. This guy was a civilian soldier. He helped defenseless people, taking them to safe places. In fact, he was a test subject. He was sent here to protect our protagonist. He rushes to give supplies and drinking water to the protagonist, but out of nowhere, he is attacked from behind. The mafia had found them. Now they were finished. The guard attacks this guy from behind. He is finished in an instant. The boss was still convinced that he could win. They outnumbered the mobster. Unfortunately, they weren't even better than that. The main character's mother was almost discovered. This subject planned to kill those who were hiding. She managed to hide the main character. Everyone is reunited, and we are presented with the final villain of this story, Sakin. He said that as long as they were in his sights, they were practically finished. However, they had a chance. With this pill, if they took it and survived, they would rule the world. Those who did not want to are killed. The rest take the pill. But unfortunately, no one survives. Sakin states that no human had survived against these pills since they were the most toxic. Now they had to leave and prepare to ascend to the upper zone. Even so, this subject did not plan to leave without checking again to take care of his reputation of not leaving witnesses. He was approaching where the main character was. His mother insults Sakin, distracting him so they wouldn't find Ri. Sakin takes the main character's mother and yells at her that the weak only exist to be eaten, killing the main character's mother. She falls right in front of the main character. He comes out crying with anger and hatred, but he sees a pill, swallows it, and while this worm was planning to kill Rai, suddenly the main character tears his arm to pieces. Their fists collide again. The bug regenerates, traversing him with his arms in the form of a dagger. Even so, the protagonist does not flinch, cutting his arm, crushing him against the floor. The protagonist still did not finish and hits him against the floor until there is nothing left. Now he launches himself against Sakin, but he gives him a simple blow that crushes him against the wall. Sakin thought that that had been all for the main character, so he decides to leave and continue. However, the main character, despite turning into a monster, managed to recover. This doctor, I would take him to a less violent place. Now 10 years had passed. These children were trying to flee. Their names are Iona and Tom. They were refugees, but both were very exhausted, trying to reach the militia, that is, what was left of the army, but these gangsters had already reached them. Now they would be forced to take the pill as experimental subjects. If it were not for the protagonist, now he was dedicated to hunting mafias. The protagonist would leave them alone if they did not cause problems. Even so, these subjects would not leave the protagonist alone, and sure, because they were level 2 experiments, they attacked the main character. Rai was immensely fast. His reflexes were on another level. In an instant, he broke the face of this subject and finished off this other one with a single attack. Now he would take the children to a safe place. This was the zone of death, protected by the militia. That would be fine for now, but the protagonist was getting worse. This is Scoff. He had been the one who accompanies the protagonist while he grew up. He is like a mentor to the protagonist. However, right now the protagonist was dying. His birth disease and the toxins from the pasta he took when he was little were eating him up like a cancer. Even so, there was an opportunity. Scoff was stuck with the protagonist's cure because he had no fire. There was a woman that he could produce it by magic if he managed to find it. They could not only find his cure, but also save the world, managing to convince the protagonist to find it. The protagonist did not know where to start. Iona reaches him, telling him that a few days ago, she met the woman of fire, just when they were about to faint from the cold. The woman of fire helped them. She emitted a strong smell, an indistinguishable one, and the protagonist begins his journey chasing that smell. Rai was very exhausted. His illness would soon stop him. Even worse, he was heading towards the fire worshippers, a bunch of crazy people who worship fire and offered human sacrifices. Just in an instant the place was full of them. If they found him, they would finish him off. Besides, he was in no condition to fight. Even so, they had found him. Once he alerted the others, he would be finished. If it weren't for this woman here, Casey, though the main character thought at first that she was the woman of fire. Casey was close to the woman of fire. She helped her, but she wasn't. She tells the main character that if he wanted to know, she would take him. Now they were on the border of the territory. All this belonged to the fire worshippers, that from now on we will call them ADF. The protagonist was upset. Casey tells him that this was the territory at least guarded by the ADF, so he could with they, out of nowhere, are attacked from behind. The protagonist dodges him. They were more ADF. They ram the protagonist. Rai gives the first a direct blow to the face, and the second a kick to the face that leaves them unconscious. But there were more of them. This big guy comes out of nowhere and hits the main character directly. He was a gigantic test subject. As if he were a feather, he lifts a container and throws it at the main character. Even so, Rai dodges it but stays cornered, or that was what the ADF thought. The protagonist forms a simple trap that tripping the giant, and with a little push, he manages to take him to the water. The other two subjects thought that they would both drown. Now they would fight against Casey, but she was calm. The protagonist was still alive. The only weakness of the giants. It was impossible for them to swim. This guy still did not give up. He attacks the protagonist, but Casey knocks him out from behind. The main character couldn't take it anymore. He was desperate to find the woman of fire. Casey approves. Now, according to her, the main character would help her save her friend from the fire worshippers. The main character tells her that she was crazy. The worshippers were hundreds worse still. They also had test subjects going. There was suicide. But Casey tells him that he had no choice. The person they had kidnapped was the Lady of Fire anyway. Both had taken the route of the sewers to arrive right at the base of the ADF. According to Casey, the fire temple was built in the strait of an earthquake, so nobody knew exactly where it was. But refugees like her knew well this landscape. The protagonist wanted to know why if Casey's friend controlled the fire. The ADF wanted to kill her. Casey replied that they only wanted to offer her as an offering, believing that this would return energy to the planet. They had to save her before they could. They did something. The protagonist asks her why she wanted to help her. She tells him that in the past the woman of fire gave her some food, no matter if it was her last portion. Nobody did that in this world. Casey was very grateful. The protagonist thought the same. There were not many people who risked their lives for a ration of food. Casey adds that when she was a child, the mafia chased her, causing her to be trapped in an abyss. She managed to get out, but he decided that he would help all the people who could without hesitation. The protagonist is surprised. That was one of his 2 reasons. As they go up, Casey offers help to the protagonist, but he rejects her. He was simply a failed test subject. If his heart races too much, his body could burst. If it means that our protagonist gave him some feminine affection as needed, they kept moving forward. The protagonist had trouble moving because of his weapon. Casey asks why the weapon, if it was useless. That was simply the only thing he had left of his parents. Now they had finally arrived. Casey knew this far. From now on they had to find where they had the Lady of Fire. There weren't many options. The main character couldn't fight against everyone. Even so, Casey had a good plan. Throw the main character out, getting him caught. She would take care of the rest. This immense place was the temple of the ADF. The protagonist, just before the sacrifice, found this girl here. Apparently she was really the Lady of Fire. Now the protagonist was frustrated because he had finally found her, but it was too late. Everything was going to end very soon. The lady takes the dagger. It was planned to take her life so that the protagonist could live until the next ceremony. The protagonist does not pay attention to where he steps and ends up falling into the void, thinking about everything he had forgotten, but he did not want to leave like that. Casey appears out of nowhere. He manages to hold him. Not only Ride but also the Lady of Fire. They managed to jump to one edge of the sanctuary. They had to run. The place was infested with the ADF. The boys are attacked because of a rain of spears. One was going to hit Casey if it weren't for the main character. The main character cuts the hair that had Casey tied to the floor. Meters later, they finally manage to cross and close the door. The main character commits the mistake of giving the lady a crossbow. Casey asks her to keep running. Later there was a way to escape, but the Lady of Fire was just a vile traitor. She was not the Lady of Fire. She had invented everything to attract Casey. She was just an offering hunter. No, she would not have obtained the boys as an offering. Probably she would be the murdered. She planned everything all the time. She endured until the last second, or else she should run away. But now that she had the 2 of them, she would be the best offering hunter, for her Ride would be her first prey. The protagonist stayed in shock, about to faint. Even so, the traitor ended worse. It turns out that the true Lady of Fire was always Casey. That's why she managed to make the protagonist shotgun work. Even so, this did not end. The ADF were already here. Now they were surrounded. They did not have escape. But Casey never runs out of ideas. She takes the lead and kisses him. The ADF didn't stop and threw their spears at the boys. But now the protagonist had his heart pounding. The protagonist transforms into his Berserk mode, the same thing he did as a child, and asks Casey if he trusted enough in him as to run no matter what was in front of him. She agreed. The protagonist asks him to jump to advance as fast as he could. He throws himself against the ADF head-on, throwing them against the floor and destroying the bridge. Casey saw how she was going to be stopped, but she trusted the protagonist. Rai pushed aside all the guys who tried to get close to her. She takes a hammer and opens the way with a single blow. At the end of the corridor, some ADF closed the door. They believed they had trapped the boys, but Rai devastated everyone. They managed to descend the hill in an instant. They take this boat that they had prepared. Casey knew that they would not follow them, since for the ADF the water is like a demon. Even so, they should continue with his guard up. Unfortunately, the protagonist was drowning. The transformation left him supremely exhausted. Casey heard something approaching, and the protagonist Kilometers later, the boys landed on this small island. owned by the militia. Casey was pensive. Suddenly Scoff appears. He is quite surprised to see Casey's fire. He explains that he was the leader of the militia. Now he wanted to take them safely to the base, but Casey would not go with them. Just like everyone else, she knew that the militia needed her only to turn on their weapons. Scoff leaves the silly mask, admits it. He only sent the protagonist to look for her so that she could activate his weapons, and he could control the world. He was crazier than a goat. Scoff gathered people like the main character to send them as a scapegoat in gangster areas. Casey didn't want to give in, so Scoff planned to hurt her, but the protagonist wakes up just in time to stop him. He takes his weapon and hits the tower with the other subject. He is also knocked out. Now the protagonist did not know what to do. The memory of his parents was destroyed. Even so, the protagonist noticed that he was too well. He felt like fighting, light and healthy. Did the effects of the pill disappear for no reason? That was impossible. He had to continue alone. He had no reason to continue with Casey. She asks him to be her bodyguard. The protagonist doesn't even accept. Who knows what crazy things he was planning to do? Unfortunately, it was enough for him to move a few meters away to feel again her pain stronger than ever. The protagonist was dying from air residues that block exothermic reactions, and the symptoms of being a test subject. The protagonist was suffering from exhaustion shock. It was a very rare disease, however. She at the same time being a special individual that makes exothermic reactions possible, dissipates matter that impedes reactions, only takes a few steps closer, and the protagonist feels great. Casey believed that her mother had made her what she is. She wanted to look for her, but her mother was in the upper zone. The protagonist didn't really want to go. Those who rule the upper zone are the most powerful gangsters in the world. It was suicide. But Casey walks away, making her sound very convincing. On the other hand, in the main character's military base, these hunters from the upper zone were hurting everyone who was behind the Casey trail. Casey was having nightmares. Nightmares from when she was a girl, and everyone believed that she was a monster. Even so, this boy here managed to protect her, causing her to wake up immediately. The protagonist is surprised because she finally woke up. Casey assures that since the shock, the phenomenon that left the world without energy, and since she lost her mother, she had not been able to sleep more than 2 hours. The protagonist tells her that this was impossible if she was asleep for almost 2 days. Now we are in the lair of the main character. The main character had to return to the base since he had left Iona and Tom there. He wanted to go get them. Casey tells him that in his state, it was impossible. He had to recover. Meanwhile, they could go find help in the refugee hideout. On the other hand, now in the Temple of Fire, the hunters from the upper area followed the trail of the boys. However, the ADF would not let anyone take the offerings for the fire. Even so, all the ADF in this area are finished in for a moment. This was a Type 3 test subject. No one, regardless of the number, was a match for him. And now that he found the protagonist's coat, he felt the strong smell more intense than ever. Casey and the protagonist had advanced even beyond the death zone on the protagonist's train. The protagonist did not have much knowledge of these places nor the type of test subjects that can be found. She simply has not created the weapons of fire enough for an army because they would be useless. That would simply reveal the identity of the true Lady of Fire. The protagonist tells her that perhaps she would be a good goddess for the insane ADF. Even so, Casey does not believe it. If she did that, she should have her side to many ADF high command if they organized and attacked the upper zone, but they failed. Everything would end not only for her, but for the whole world. The protagonist tells her that then there was only one option left. Both could simply hide, and he would ensure the safety of Casey. Even so, that was impossible for her. Not only because there is a world to save, but also because the protagonist will die before her. Her presence momentarily neutralized the shock caused by the protagonist's illness. Only he could fade the shock into the air to create fire. But the protagonist wasn't buffing, just the protagonist's death is delayed. but it was inevitable. That's why they needed to create a world without exhaustion shock. They had finally reached the refugee hideout. The boys moved forward. The place was simply colossal. However, the protagonist felt that the inhabitants were hiding ready to attack. Casey calmed him down, saying that this was normal for them. Outsiders are very good study. For now, they needed to talk to the mayor. The main character was anxious, since even Debian had to rescue Iona and Tom. Unfortunately, he belonged to the militia. It would be a bit difficult for them to listen to him, which is why Casey asked him to bring the supplies. He just had to trust her. These refugees look more like a wild herd about to hurt the head of anyone who comes near. Casey tries to convince them, but this guy here was like crazy, yelling that the militiamen were not welcome and were at war against them. Many people were hurt by the militia. Also, the protagonist did not help much. In fact, he was going to be hurt with a hammer if it were not for Canvas. She had been locked up, but she knew that the protagonist did not know anything about the subject who locked her up. This old man calms down, and the mayor had finally arrived. Everyone was welcome, especially the supplies. Now the boys are talking to the mayor. Lona was able to escape because the mayor sent some refugees to the militia base, but when they arrived, everything was destroyed and in ruins. Not even the mayor knew for sure. Lona affirms that in his confinement, the men shouted hunters from the upper zone. The protagonist says that the most likely were behind Casey. They should continue forward. They could not stop, however. Casey needed a map before continuing. Even all the maps were destroyed. There is a man who walked from the upper zone and arrived at this shelter. A wanderer carrying a cart of supplies. The warehouse guardian. Unfortunately, no one knew where he hid his items, and the subject was not very sociable. The only thing they could do was go talk directly with him. This was the subject. He rejected them and offended the protagonist. Perhaps the only way to approach him was through his wife. It turns out that some time ago, when the militia was being formed, their son enlisted to fight against the mafias. Unfortunately, the experiments caused him the same disease that the protagonist had, causing his death. His wife sat next to his son's grave, losing the will to live. He had to return from the upper area to here. He built a map so as not to forget his son's belongings. He tried his best to make his wife smile back. Surely he would give that map too. It would be difficult to do something that even the husband couldn't do. Hardly anyone talked to her, except for this stinky friend here. Some people despised the lady because she was sick with shock, just like her only friend. Her bad smell made it seem like the shock of exhaustion was contagious. It wasn't like that. This mummy in quotes wanted to help. She tells the Rye and Casey that her son, before belonging to the militia force, was a great chef. The main reason in the lady's life was to try her son's food. So they needed a delicious dish to lift the lady's spirits. They already had a fire now. They needed a good cook. The best chef in the world was in the death zone, Pepe. He would be perfect for the job. Now we are going out of the shelter. These three who do not emphasize who they are or what they do. They talked about how boring eating had become. Only Pepe could cook something to cheer them up. Unfortunately, kidnapping him was throwing himself into the upper area as an enemy, since Pepe. He was a rebel who escaped from that place. While they were talking, the guy who had the most information was kidnapped by our team. The guy at first didn't want to open his mouth. He even thought he could resist. However, Rai shows him the difference in strength and gives them the location. Later, they were still far from arriving. The protagonist asks Casey if the mummy was trustworthy. She replies that they had no other way. They move forward a little. The mummy affirms that the barracks were further ahead, but that the boys had hidden. They could detect the smell of the militia soldiers. The protagonist thought that informing you was the snitch. So he asks Casey to escape while he sees her. How can he rescue the mummy? Still, the mummy stays, greets with the soldiers. He was a spy for the militia. The boys are ambushed. Daisy is attacked, but the protagonist saves her. Between the two, they manage to resist the kidnapping. This soldier pulls out a poison gas grenade. The protagonist takes Casey and jumps out the window, falling into the ocean. Both manage to get out into the shore. Casey saw that the main character was drowning, so he gave him mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. But the main character took it badly. Remember that if his heart races, the main character will do explosion. He still had to find Pepe. Casey, he knew of a place that every cook would visit, and the fastest way to travel was through the sewers. Now they were heading to a kitchen facility. It was very easy to get there. Pepe could easily be there. The boys started going up floor after floor after floor after floor. They were climbing the tallest and oldest building in the city. That it was just what made it ideal. The protagonist was super exhausted and didn't feel like walking. Casey says that from here it was easy to get anywhere. They arrived at the beginning, and there was nothing at the end either. So they separated a bit to cover more ground. The protagonist reaches the roof, seeing the whole panorama. Although he was not alone, the hunter from the Supreme Zone reached them. They had no escape, in case facing him was a problem. In his current state, any false movement would be a suicide. When the hunter prepares, Casey appears, attacks from behind, but continues towards the main character, throwing himself into the void. The main character could not believe that she did not even let him fight. Casey had already told him. From this building he could literally go anywhere. The protagonist calls him out for not telling him the small details of his plans. Now they both had to return to the village. The protagonist does not object because he was also indebted to the refugees. When they arrived, everything was too quiet. The mayor found them. He could only save a minority. Most of the villagers were captured. Now he would take them with the prisoners. They were the same militia soldiers. Now they had to prepare to release them. The main character tries to tell Casey about the plan, but they had inadvertently captured her. The main character falls because Casey was too far away. The mayor betrays her to save the town. The main character was dying. Casey manages to break free and runs towards the main character, but the mayor activates a trap, causing the protagonist to fall into the void. Now they would all be treated as experiments. The mayor complains because they still had not released his people, if he had already fulfilled his part of the deal, but the criminal tells him that he was naive. No person of his class would keep his word. The mayor says it was impossible to travel with so many people. This guy says that he would not take them all, only those who resisted the experiment as test subjects. Now they would start the experiments. Casey did not give up. He threatened to commit suicide if they hurt the villagers. She would only be good for gangsters alive. This guy tells her to go ahead. She could do it. With or without fire, they got nothing. She could do whatever she wanted. Casey didn't know what to do anymore, but Mummy took the subject from behind. This guy yells at Mummy that even if he finished it, there were dozens more soldiers. He couldn't win. Mummy was not alone, he was accompanied. This was another group. Apart from the mafias, the militia or the refugees, the GK, they were neutral, but a favor to the Mummy was worth it to them. Now the head of the militia was not thinking of moving or giving in, so they hesitated until the sunlight ran out. Both sides had their bet. With the arrival of night, the advantage was definitive for the GK. They began to cut the masks of all the members of the militia with the advantage of an infrared kill. In an instant, the members of the GK started with the masks of the entire militia. It did not make sense for them to use their gas weapons. However, this was not over. The leader of GK is attacked from behind. The hunters were here. He is quickly cornered, only being saved by his companions. The hunter tries to attack Casey but manages to be protected. Now she and Mummy run to a safe place. They enter this room that had nothing safe. The GK were not fighting, they were simply enduring a beating. This giant hunter had overwhelming strength. At this rate, there would be no one left to fight. The giant breaks down the door, making his way. Now the Mummy would be his victim if it weren't for the main character. The main character managed to survive with some hair. that he had caught in the temple of fire. It was still little. It was enough to get out of the hole where he fell and wait for the right moment to attack. However, this big guy was far from being knocked down. The protagonist hits him, but it didn't hurt him in this state. It was useless. He had to transform. Beto appears out of nowhere. If I need to name him, because I'm going to mention him a lot, he catches the main character and attacks him with his sickle, but the mayor makes him miss. He receives a good blow, giving the protagonist a chance to free himself and counterattack, if it weren't because they were 2 versus 1. Now Giant only turns his arm into that of a Type 2, trying to crush the protagonist. However, Casey attacks him, preventing the protagonist from dying. She is hit to the ground and remains unconscious. Before the Giant finishes her off, the main character protects her. At that moment it cost her an arm, and seeing Casey hurt, her heart beats so hard to become a level monster too. The protagonist breaks the Giant's arm to pieces, also gives him a devastating blow that separates him from Casey. Mummy takes Casey. Now they had to leave. Beto attacks them, but the protagonist takes his sickle and smashes it to pieces. Giant tries to throw himself on top with his last strength, but the protagonist kicks him that ends up finishing him off. Rai asks Beto why they were trying to hurt the Lady of Fire. Isn't she supposed to only serve them alive? However, if the fire disappeared on the power of the Mafia would be absolute, so the main character had no choice but to kill or be killed. Beto kept talking, but the main character takes him head-on, giving him a good blow, then another blow, and another to make him understand the difference in power. The main character was getting too tired. His illness, and not having Casey close to him, was limiting him. Beto laughs at the pain. It's been a long time since he made an effort in a fight. Now, as a thank you for hurting him, he would show the main character what a man does. Berserk Type 3. The main character is confused. He didn't even know that this was possible. Beto's transformation radically increased his reach, range, strength, and speed. The main character could barely dodge the blows. Mummy tells Casey that they had to leave. It was very dangerous. Even so, she did not want to leave. If she moved away, it would be more difficult for Rai to fight. I would bet that he would win. So she would not move away from him. Rai, despite using his Type 2 Berserk, managed to do a lot of damage, but his tentacles regenerated. He had to give him a good blow to the face. Beto reaches him, although he is unable to finish the blow. The protagonist only needed a minimum chance to give him a good blow. The remaining villagers throw rocks from above at Beto. This distracts him for an instant, and the main character. It was his best blow. If that didn't finish him off, then he had no chance. However, Beto got up very quickly as if he had just been pushed. The main character already left. He was giving up. He wondered why he was so eager to live in this cruel world. Beto lost his hat, and when the protagonist looks at his true face now, he remembers it. The last time he saw his mother, the last time she breathed, the last time I had seen him. Sakin, that name, that guy, was why RAI had to move on. Mummy yells that it was impossible. Someone that powerful did not have to be in the death zone. Now the protagonist was suffering from a mutation, one that was turning him into a Type 3 monster. Mummy explains that mutations are caused by the psychological state of the individual. Most of the test subjects become giants for fear of giants. Others who have the greatest desire to kill get the tentacles as a long-range and effective weapon to hurt. But now the protagonist, due to he felt fear of losing Casey, he achieved the Iron Fist mutation. Beto did not understand it. He was barely a level 2 rookie Berserk. How was it possible for him to evolve so quickly? The main character only remembered Sakin, and because he wanted to crush him. Beto attacks him from the front, but against the Iron Fist his tentacles had little strength. Sakin gathers all his strength in a giant sickle to finish off the protagonist. Rai attacks him from the front. No matter how many tentacles he gathered, they were nothing in front of the fist of the iron, the main character. When the main character destroys them, and is Beto right in front of him, he hits him in the face with all his might, crushing him to the ground once and for all. But the protagonist could no longer support himself. A few hours have passed. Now we're going to this igloo with Casey. I honestly don't know what he's doing. The thing is that the main character wakes up. He says that they should go quickly to the upper area. Casey contradicts him, saying that they still don't have the map. Mummy says that he agrees with the protagonist and maybe he can cook something delicious. He had some ingredients gathered in the hideout, so he takes them there. The hideout was far away and hidden. Mummy said that it was better that way. If the hungry people found out, they would be attacked. He had a very secure mini kitchen. These were the mummy's ingredients. Although according to the protagonist that instead of making the lady happy it would make her faint. Casey lights the fire. She tries the soup, but he gets angry. The protagonist also tastes it and is surprised. It wasn't possible for it to be so delicious. In fact, it was possible because Mummy was actually Chef Pepe. Pepe's costume was covered in elephant urine. That's why it smelled so horrible. Pepe deceived them because he was putting them to the test. Since on his long way to find the fire, he suffered many kidnappings and imprisonments, he had to make sure that the boys were trustworthy. In short, now they had food ready for the lady. They go to her with the bowl of soup. When the lady smells the aroma, she receives the soup and goes to her son's grave. She cries, talking to her son, saying that this soup was like goodbye between them. Now she had to continue with her life. Her husband arrives, and they both get over it. It was time for the boys to continue their journey. The other villagers arrive. The mayor apologizes to Casey for the betrayal. She didn't know what to say. Even so, the mayor asks her to accept the map to the upper area. The guardian, he had given it to him from the warehouse just last night. The boys were the most apt to carry the map. Plus the mayor gives him some branches, but Pepe rejects it. He learned that once they betray you, they will do it twice without thinking about it. Right, yes, she wanted to eat the branches that apparently were delicious, and Casey, despite everything, thanks the mayor for everything he had done for her in the past. Now everyone was fine. Later we are in the protagonist's car. The protagonist was not very happy because someone as mysterious as Pepe accompanied them. Pepe said that he was a chef by nature. He simply could not get away from the fire. Also, he had been in the upper area. He had contacts. In short, he would be very helpful. Pepe makes the main character shut up for a moment, since it was very noisy. Casey asks him if he knew how to get to the upper zone. He had gone through all that when he was kidnapped. While if he had the map and the names of the area, he would be very capable of finding his way around. The test subjects kept appearing as if they were mastering the side effects. Pepe affirms that with good organization, it would be enough going by the train. They had to make a detour to the City of Iron. There they could get better information, better spare parts, and even improvements, since they were the last blacksmiths on the planet. This was the city of the organization of blacksmiths Roxanne, and this blacksmith here was Alex. Back with the team while Rai and Pepe made the train run, the protagonist asks if there really was something good on the outskirts of the death zone. Pepe replies that this place was for those who resigned themselves to reaching the upper zone. It was good to establish yourself. Even the zone of chaos became safer the further you got from the upper zone. The border between both zone of death and chaos was better for these men. Casey affirms that the train would not be so easy to repair. Pepe affirms that if that was the case, the best thing was for someone skilled to repair it. Casey doubts if someone will be able to fix his train, or at least have the will. However, Pepe doubts that there is not a single fan of fire among a lot of blacksmiths. Now we are directly in Roxanne. Alex was finishing his nails to be able to sell them and get resources. Out of nowhere, this airhead, called Ralph, arrives, telling him that it had been difficult to find him, and he had to pay his daily fee. Alex says that he was just finishing today's nails to give to Roxanne. Ralph takes his father's book from Alex. He mocks because he still believed that the fire could come back. He hits Alex, takes away his nails, and threatens him in case he didn't want to continue working for him. Alex was only powerless, clinging to his father's knowledge. Alex's younger brother, arrives. He asks Alex why he was clinging to the fire. He only made them beat and humiliate him. Alex did not lose hope. In this book was the formula for creating a better world. Even so, Alexis could go without food, but she needed some water. Alex tells her to be calm. She had fixed a tool for a couple of months. They could get enough water if she sold it to Roxanne. Unfortunately, that was the one her father took. Now we are in Roxanne's residence. People brought their work to this place to exchange it for water and food. It was just a business. Nobody felt compassion. This was Alex's tool, and this was his father, called Adam. The merchant told him, he says, that in exchange for the tool, he would give him all the water he could carry. However, Adam only wanted alcohol. The merchant is surprised, but Roxanne tells him to do what he asked for. In this city you ask for what you're worth. That was rule. We return with the team on the train. Rai says that they could not move forward if they needed someone to repair the train. Pepe says that the blacksmiths had a work schedule and some rules. By themselves there would be no one who wanted to repair the train. Even if there was, it would be dangerous to trust him with the identity of the team. The only option was to kidnap a blacksmith silently. Pepe claims that nobody knew Rai and Casey, so they could freely explore the city as long as they covered their scent. He on his own, I would find something to cook. Further on, the protagonist and Casey took the route of the sewers. They followed the path that, according to Pepe, led them towards the blacksmith. They had to keep a low profile. Out of nowhere, the ADF appeared. That was a problem. Gang members also appeared from nowhere. Nothing but the boys managed to hide. Now above their heads they hear complaints and claims. It was coincidentally Alex yelling at Tom because he had bought alcohol. Alex wanted to know where the incredible engineer who drew the plans for all those incredible machines was. Adam had given up long ago. His life's work was in that book. Alex still had hope that the fire would come back, so he could help many people. His dad had already given up long ago. His brother was very thirsty. So Alex, I would find her no matter the cost. Alex went directly to Ralph. This guy was the son of the district representative. Alex thought that after so many tools that Ralph had taken, maybe he could give him some water. Ralph wouldn't even give him water. On the contrary, he hits him. He begs him. He would even do all his work. Ralph was bored listening to Alex about the fire and that nonsense. He was thinking of breaking Alex. If it weren't for Casey. She tells him that maybe the fire could come back at any moment. Ralph was going to her too, hitting, except for Pepe's dust. Casey leaves the floor to Ralph. When the subject gets up from the blow, the boys had already disappeared. Now in the sewers, Alex wanted to know who they were. He confuses them with the ADF. The protagonist says that they were special, so Alex understands that they were fugitives. Casey tells him that they could be called as a secret organization, one that will bring fire back in the world. Alex just thought they were crazy. Casey knew it, and if he trusted them, she would give him a demonstration. Even so, Alex couldn't leave his family. The protagonist tells him that he could take them somewhere sure. However, for Adam, that was impossible. That man planned to die right here. They could stay, but not alone. He was the only one who worked to meet his daily goal. Adam, for being the weakest and most useless in the district, would be assigned as a slave or test subject. The man who did the assignments was the district leader. Casey was already thinking of a plan. Surely he had already planned something. Alex had to go. His brother was very thirsty. But Casey gives him some water, and Alex runs home. The protagonist began to think that it was better to look for another person. Now we are at the district representative's house. Ralph had been crying like a scared child, complaining about Alex and asking his father, named Arian, to assign Adam as a slave. Rayon tells him to calm down. The drum from Adam had given Roxanne a good tool to get her attention, so she was going to send it anyway. On the other hand, at Alex's house, Alexis tells him that a while ago they had taken his father. Alex tells his brother that from now on he should also do his part. He takes the tool and leaves. In this tunnel, they were taking Adam. Raylan tells him that in the past Adam talked a lot about being the best engineer. He was glad to see him like this. Then Alex arrives. He tells Raylan that his father fulfilled all the quantums. Raylan tells him that in the end that didn't matter. There was no other blacksmith as useless as Adam. So Alex was thinking of hurting his hand so that he would be taken away. If it weren't for the main character who took the tool from his hand, Casey and Riot come here because Alexis asked them for help. Alex yells that if they stayed they would die, but the main character helped everyone who asked him for help no matter what. Raylan orders his men to attack. Casey tells the main character to be very silent. The main character didn't even have needing to transform, were it not for the fact that the soldiers had full metal parts. Their armor could cut through and withstand anything that wasn't a test subject. Even so, the main character neutralizes them very easily. Casey appears out of nowhere, and that magic dust from Pepe explodes in his face. Raylan, with the little breath he had left, says that with all these actions they were making enemies of all the blacksmiths. Even thus, Casey's plan was not to confront the blacksmith system. Rather, it was to take advantage of it, making Alex the representative of District 3. On the other hand, Roxanne was informed by this subject of someone who was causing disturbances in the areas of the new district, since anyone who violates the rules must be executed. Elsewhere on the Raylan side, his son and the guards were arrested. In the representative area, you could only be chosen if you had the most bots with you. Rai tells Alex that he was the best candidate, but Alex knew that it was the opposite. He was just scrawny. All representatives are the most strong or intelligent, but Alex did not consider himself one. Casey proposed to Adam. According to his notes, it was seen that he had a lot of knowledge. It was complicated. Adam was not in his best condition. He lost his job, his motivation, and his wife. After the impact due to exhaustion, he no longer had a reason to continue being an engineer. Casey proposes to Alex. If they returned his motivation and remained as a representative of the district, Alex should accompany them. On the other hand, far from there, this test subject was looking for weapons. But iron-forged weapons could not be used by someone other than a blacksmith. In fact, those types of weapons were the ones that could hurt a test subject. This gentleman makes fun of the rules and Roxanne. When he was about to devour, Roxanne arrives. The blacksmith is happy, but Roxanne executes him. The Butchin says that the only possible reason for not selling the steel is because it was what he could hurt Roxanne. Taking a spear and shooting it at Roxanne, but he doesn't flinch. He literally didn't even scratch him. He completely turned into iron. This Butchin says he was a sumo who had reached level 3. He attacks Roxanne, but he gets rid of it with just one blow. Appears in front of him, and gives him a single blow that breaks him in an instant. Returning to the house of the 3rd District Representative, the protagonist asks Alex why he was so afraid of Roxanne. Alex comments that several years ago, when the mafias were fighting over these territories, to find out who monopolized the blacksmith, Roxanne appeared destroying them all. If he was so strong, it didn't make sense for him to be here, but nobody really knew. Pepe appeared out of nowhere, happy because Casey was fine. He had managed to form a plan with information that he was able to obtain. The thing is that the slave market opened the next day. They had to show up with a slave from the district. Alex offered himself as a slave. He trusted the team. Pepe was going to suggest the same. They couldn't let Roxanne or anyone else find out what was happening. Something else. There would be a tournament of strength. The reward would be an iron weapon, one of those that only blacksmiths can use. In addition, the prize was accompanied by the slaves of the 3rd District, according to Pepe. It is most likely that Roxanne stayed here to evaluate or recruit the test subjects who had to go through this city. However, if Alex was the slave, then who would convince people to choose Adam as their representative? Alex asks Casey to show that test by fire to his father, would suffice? Casey requests that as long as she joined them, she would do as he asked. Later in the slave registry, Alex was already in position. The protagonist and Pepe were already ready for the tournament. Pepe was somewhat surprised. He thought that the protagonist would be upset with him for making him fight. On the contrary, Rai was willing to fight to learn how to use his power. Pepe tells him to be careful. It was not known until what moment Casey's hair would take effect. Now the tournament began. The protagonist goes up on stage. His first rival would be this guy. Now we return with Casey. She took Alex's father to the abandoned forge in the city. She told him that his son was fighting to save him. He took Casey and threw her to the ground for cheating on him. He believed that he was the one who he fights all his life to protect them. After losing his wife, he had nothing left. Suddenly Adam felt that his body was beginning to heat up. It was precisely a test of faith, telling him that it was not the mafias that changed the world. People like Alex are the ones who changed the world. Now Adam remembered his reasons for fighting again. Returning with the protagonist, he analyzed his opponent. It was not seen that he had a startling power. Surely he was a tentacle type that we will call Squid. The protagonist, deducing from the blow that the squid throws, believes that it would not be necessary to transform. He attacks from the front. Squidward was very flexible. He literally stuck to the protagonist's arm, forcing him to go back. It was strange Pepe did not get information of this type. That was because depending on the situation he used his various weapons. He attacked an opponent who was outside, and he sucks it in. Not just one, he was hungry. He ends up sucking in two people. Pepe yells at him that he was getting more powerful while he was eating. He had to stop him. The protagonist thinks about crushing his head, but it was too late. His transformation was complete. Pepe sucked him in. He understood. He found no information, not because he was weak, but because he changed shape. He attacks the protagonist with a much higher speed and increasing power. The protagonist knew that he could not continue dodging, or he would get sick again. He really wasn't very strong, but his bites were lethal, is what Pepe yells at him. Although the protagonist lets himself be caught, Squid thought he was winning. The problem is that the only way the protagonist knew to activate his power is when he was in front of death. Squid, he didn't plan to stay still. He wanted to consume every last drop of the protagonist's power. Sensing that he was a berserk, he was assigned. However, something was wrong. He was not being absorbed. On the contrary, the protagonist jumps and hits the floor at full speed. For the current level of the Squid Prota, he never had a chance. Pepe says that it was a very good decision to join this group. In his first fight, the protagonist did not even sweat. Apart from two opponents had already been eliminated. Even so, they needed to be aware of Casey's hair. The protagonist felt how its effect was reduced when he became in Berserk. All that was left was to wait for Casey to arrive for the next round. On the other hand, Casey and Adam left the forge. The smell of smoke would be a problem. They had to return quickly to the district, and Casey had to go quickly with Rai, but it was already too late. The visitors smelled. Back at the stadium, Pepe states that they had almost no information about the opponents because they were new test subjects. However, there was a skilled one that the protagonist would have to face. Rai didn't care if he couldn't win this tournament and control his power. He would never have chances against Sakin. Pepe says it was good to go see his next opponent. He was a tough guy, very powerful. No one had been able to defeat him. According to Pepe's source, that would be the next to challenge Roxanne. This guy who had defeated? And who is this girl? We'll call her Tigress. Yes, I know I lack originality, but I'm not going to spend half an hour thinking of a good name. I'm terrible with names. Let's continue. Tigress tells the protagonist that he was doing it wrong. If he kept using the Berserk mode like this, he would exhaust himself awkwardly. Pepe took the opportunity to ask him how the Berserk was controlled. Tigress replied that at the current level of the protagonist, he was unable to control it. He could only do one thing: give him a good blow to the jaw so that he fainted, and don't waste any more energy. Pepe asks what was your interest in the protagonist. Tigress says that the protagonist was special. No test subject had that look. Later our protagonist woke up. If it weren't because he fainted and his body literally stopped consuming energy, the protagonist was not alive. The problem is that the protagonist was bordering on the limit, and the next fight was approaching. They were already in the 4th round. Due to the majority of the protagonist's opponents, they surrendered. However, the few that remained had little or no information. The protagonist was determined to continue fighting as long as it helped him to continue advancing, but Rai did not give more. The hair was already, it wasn't working. Casey just managed to get there. Pepe had sent the horses to escape from the blacksmiths. Casey was worried not because Rai wasn't well, but because he looked different. The main character was using his transformation for too long. Now his heart is breaking and seized him. All he wanted was to finish off his opponent. His Berserk reacted when he felt his murderous intentions. Equipping him with sickle-shaped weapons, the protagonist jumps versus horns, if that's what we're going to call him, cutting off his arm. Without, however, it wasn't that easy. Cuernos regenerated quite well. If it wasn't because he made the mistake of throwing himself head-on against the main character, Rai finished him off with a single blow. Cuernos wanted to give up, but the main character lost control. Now he was sucking him. He would be disqualified if it weren't for Tigress, who stops him. With a single blow he stops the beating of the protagonist's heart, nipping the transformation at the root. Now the protagonist was in the final. Tigress tells him that everything had been a test. When the knockout hit him at a point where he reduced his mental capacity, that's why the protagonist lost control. She is amazed at how the protagonist recovered after transforming into a Berserk. The Berserk mode is when you are at the limit of your emotions, then that anger it takes over the person. The protagonist was different. Even after everything he returned to his normal form. It was as if he was merging with his Berserk mode, as if he was assimilating it. She was the other finalist. Her objective was to assimilate all the information possible from the test subjects, so she could exterminate them. The protagonist immediately transforms. They both jump head-on. Tigress was skilled, very strong. She tells him that her points were unprotected and launches a rain of attack, defeating him to the ground. If it weren't for the fact that the protagonist was in Type 3, the Tigress steps back. The protagonist attacks her with all his might. She stops the impact and takes advantage of the inertia, telling him that without training mentally, his power was limited to his physical strength. Crushing him against the floor, the protagonist felt that his bones would break at any moment. Even so, he hits back, tries to surprise the Tigress, but it surrounds him, and makes a key trying to break him, suffocating him. All the test subjects died the same way. However, the protagonist was not a monster. She did not have to take his life, letting him escape and declaring that she surrendered. The protagonist asks her why she gave up. She tells him that she was only fighting to eliminate monsters. However, according to Tigress, Rai didn't have much time left before turning into a monster. The protagonist tells her that they looked alike. She wanted to eliminate the subject's test, and he wanted to eliminate the boss. He asks her to please help him understand how the transformations work. She didn't want to, but the protagonist tells her that Sakin took her mom away. He begs her to help him. Out of nowhere, the assistant to Roxanne calls him. It turns out that the owner of the city wanted to see him. Tigress tells him that perhaps he will teach her a little. First, he should go to Roxanne. The protagonist tells him to be very aware of her. He has many questions. Tigress makes him come back. The protagonist was still in terrible condition, and she had knowledge of Oriental medicine. After a shower of needles, the main character felt much better. He simply made way for the main character's regeneration. The assistant screwed around a lot. The boys try to talk to the main character, and he goes to Roxanne, obviously Casey behind the not to leave him dying. Now the main character was facing Roxanne. Casey had followed him. She thought that things should calm down, at least until Adam convinced the people to make him leader. The main character felt strange. Rather, he didn't feel anything. If he won, everything would be resolved for Roxanne. Roxanne tells the protagonist that there was no information about someone like him. Change shapes and absorb them, forming blades, tentacles, and hardness. Roxanne was everywhere in this horrible world and never saw anything like it. Roxanne, he tells him that he should consider himself lucky that he found him. He proposes to join his group, so they would dominate the entire upper area. Roxanne only stayed here to find worthwhile warriors. After living in the upper area, she understood that there was no place to share, only to conquer. The protagonist tells him that it did not make sense to only gather test subjects to conquer the upper area. However, Roxanne had a trick with which she made the test subjects even more powerful than they are. He had a very special maniac. This man could create test pills. Casey thinks that if that was true, he should know where the test drug comes from. The main character questions why, if it was so amazing, they would give him a pill to make it more powerful. Dr. CHUZ. That's what we're going to call him. He says that the real reason is because the main character made him very curious. He wanted to know how someone like the main character could react. The main character tells him that he was wasting his time. He had nothing super new to prove. Besides, the only reason he came here, he was already more than determined. He would defeat Roxanne no matter what. Roxanne says that it was fine. There was no reason to hold back. The protagonist transforms into a berserk and attacks him from the front, giving him a direct blow that barely made him sway. It didn't even tickle him. Roxanne opens her hand, creating an air gap, and attacks the protagonist. On the other hand, in the 3rd District Square, there was Adam with the people. The meeting told them that he would give them water. If it was a lie, the citizens would kill him. Adam yells, saying that if they elect him as a representative, everyone would have free water. The people, they were bothering each other. No one likes to waste their time. But Adam reveals what he built with Casey's fire, a water pump. A long time ago, Alex had found the pipes where the water ran. They just needed to pump it. The problem is that I just needed a lot of water to make it start. People didn't seem very convinced. Raylan appears out of nowhere. Pepe and Alex appeared out of nowhere and ran to the square to help. Raylan yelled that they had locked him up. They were being tricked. They needed to pour out all the water that they had when it wasn't even sure if it worked. Alex and Pepe hide to see how everything is going. If they couldn't by hook, it would be by crook. Adam yells if they were okay with this, having to work every day to have chances to bring water to their homes. He had also given up a long time ago, but his son had shown him that he is not finished. It was not fair to have to kiss Raylan's feet for a glass of water. Raylan says that Adam hired some foreigners to kidnap him. They were Roxanne's enemies. Adam asks him if he had proof. Even so, Raylan as a representative ordered them to imprison him. If not for this old man, who gives the water, he had, reminding everyone how Alex had helped them. Unlike of the others who abandoned him to his fate, Alex helped many people in this district. However, Raylan shouted that if they opposed, they would be considered accomplices and executed. Although it was late, the other people also wanted to contribute. It was not only Alex. Adam, he was the best blacksmith in this city. This city belonged to the blacksmiths. Raylan was just a subordinate of Roxanne. So they start pouring the water they had. Adam tries to push the lever for pumping, but he just couldn't, because luckily his son was always there to help him. Now the water had run out. Raylan already wanted to make them pay for everything, but there were many more willing to help. Now several of them began to push the lever. A drop came out, and suddenly a huge water jet had saved them. Finally, everyone had free water. Adam surrendered and apologized to his children. But the hateful Raylan couldn't stand the idiocy. He attacked him. Alex got in the way, but the main character manages to get rid of Raylan. Now the idiot thought that all the blacksmiths would attack the main character and Casey. On the contrary, they were going to finish it. They didn't see anything. A while later, in the representatives' room, the leaders of other districts wanted to form alliances. It would be difficult, but Adam would manage. He leaves Alex in charge of the team and says goodbye. Casey tells Alex that being with them would be very risky. Alex was used to danger. For him, it was worth fighting against the mafias and returning fire to this world. Even so, he left a point in the air. The main character was fighting against Roxanne, right? Well, what happened was that the prota gave up. There was no point in continuing to fight, and he agreed to team up. It was good to work for Roxanne. At least that way he would save time. Currently, there was no way to beat him. However, he had the location of Dr. Chuz. But now that the districts were beginning to abandon the rules of Roxanne, due to the free water, a massacre would soon be formed. Just at the same time, Roxanne's assistant tells her about the alliance of the districts to stop working for water. The rules did not matter. Now they would be eliminated. Peppa had arranged an appointment for the protagonist with the Tigress. Casey supposes that he would keep his promise to show the protagonist how to become more powerful. They had to hurry before Roxanne attacked. Alex is in charge of the preparations to escape. The protagonist and Casey arrived at this place, some abandoned mines. Tigress was in the middle of a chase, but she would take some time for the protagonist. She tells him that the training of both was very different. Even so, the protagonist managed to endure becoming a monster. Perhaps that way he would have a chance to learn which was determination. The protagonist was not fighting properly. Using all your strength to attack consecutively. Without training, it would only cause injuries or fractures. He needed a sign that would help him unlock his power without having to be on the brink of death. That's where determination comes in. The sign of the Tigress was a scream. When she enters the zone of determination, imagine her movements before carrying them out. Although the protagonist did not use sophisticated movements or attacks, it was applied to him in another way. His determination should help him control his transformations. For now, they would start with something simple. Destroy this huge door made of reinforced steel, the strongest steel in the city. The protagonist gives it a good blow, but it doesn't even tickle him. Tigress tells him that he should imagine being able to break it, or all his friends would be killed, and he imagined his fist as a huge hammer that destroyed everything around him. The protagonist began to understand it. Tigress asks him to scream regardless, and think that even if he died he should destroy the door. The protagonist transforms, and uses all with what he has in one hit. Tigress tells him that he should have remembered that feeling, but now applying it to his mutation, that was simply a pinch of his potential. Since his body and mind were not yet connected, now the problem is that the protagonist did not enter his zone by shouting of determination. They had to find something that really hurt him psychologically, perhaps memories of his childhood. A little later, in the leader's office, Roxanne had started to move. She was looking for them. This was not over. They had to follow the plan. Peppa and Adam headed to the closed mine. Casey and Alex were already there. Alex was ready to fight even if it seems like a losing fight. Out of nowhere, this huge door almost crushed Adam. Even so, Alex saves him. Roxanne was already here. They run, but Roxanne attacks them with the other door. Even so, the main character appears to save them. Roxanne tells the protagonist that she would pay for betraying him. Even so, the protagonist also felt betrayed. He was in the Chuz laboratories, and he did not find any other ally. All the test subjects were in a pile of corpses. An army never existed. Only they were laboratory rats to test the pill that would make Roxanne stronger. He was now more than determined to finish off the protagonist. Right now felt and remembered his determination better than ever. Now the protagonist could transform into level 2 at will. He didn't even feel hurt. Transforming in this way was very harmless. Roxanne, now we'll call him Gray. He makes a huge jump. He would fall in the middle of the mine to destroy the ground and create a landslide. However, the protagonist stops him, giving him a blow that really surprised Gray. The protagonist gives him another one in the face. Gray holds him by the arms. They both land. Gray was surprised. The protagonist, despite to use the same power, it had a devastating impact. Rai had not finished giving him a blow to the neck that would destroy anything in its path. Even so, Gray did not even bleed. The protagonist knew that his blows were good, but Gray's defense was even better. If he wanted to defeat him, he had to use the third level of the Berserk. Gray understood that if it took time to strengthen his defense, it would have ended everything for him. He needed to increase the intensity. Gray was planning to use that attack, with which he defeated him last time, though the main character throws himself into the air so no one would be in danger, but Gray hits him with all that attack. The main character falls. Gray asks him what he had done. In reality, Rai did not fully receive the blow. He just repeated what Tigress did with him in the tournament. Gray tries to crush him. The protagonist gets up. But things were starting to look bad. Now not even his level 2 blows were being effective. Gray tells the protagonist that his friends trusted him too much, that the protagonist yells at him that it was the other way around. He completely trusted his friends. Out of nowhere a gigantic magnet appears. An electromagnet, that is, a magnet powered by electricity. Gray could not believe it. The woman of fire was real. She was making it work, the magnet. However, with the fuel they had, the magnet would only last a few minutes. The protagonist knew that giving it another hit without being level 3 would cause the complete destruction of the magnet. Gray was also against a rock in a hard place. If it was untransformed, he could finish off Casey, but the protagonist would crush him before recovering his steel armor. The only thing he would do was wait. The protagonist was in trouble. He was screaming, but he was not evolving. Casey knew that time would end at any moment. Alex was at hangs Gray and gives it a hammer blow. It was too late, the fuel ran out. Gray transforms into an even more gigantic monster, but the protagonist manages to connect with his heart and ascend to the third level. He throws himself at Gray, and with a single blow from the front, he tears him to pieces. It was finally over. Gray was exterminated. Casey went to the main character. He felt great. He was fine. Now he was more sure than ever that he could face off against Sakin. Alex yells at Casey and the main character that they could go to fix the train. But first they had to talk to the doc. In the lab a while later, the team was interrogating Chuz. He said he knew the test people. That was the reason why he had so many mutation pills. However, he didn't know who made them. Chuz was a simple pill delivery man in his time as a gangster. That's why he joined Gray, to create a pill that surpassed the power of conventional ones, so that the world would recognize him. He only had a clue, Dr. Roxanne. That doctor worked in the manufacture of that pill. The thing is that the same doctor was the one who medicated the protagonist as a child when he was in the militia. They had to find Dr. Roxanne, although according to Chuz this subject was very slippery. He was also always in the cities, most controlled by the gangsters. They wouldn't find him unless the doctor wanted to talk to them. So Casey and Rai should leave. However, Chuz yells that he knew Pepe. He says that they didn't really know anything about Pepe. Pepe was also a doctor. All his colleagues were murdered. He was a twisted man hungry for knowledge, willing to betray anyone. Even so, they would not do anything against Pepe. They would remain firm until the day Pepe decides to betray them. That day the protagonist would make him pay. So they go in search of Pepe to organize a new plan. Very, very far from there, in the upper area, inside a mafia hideout, there was Sakin. Learning about the death of Gray, he also found out about Casey. The fire kept going around there. Even so, it was obvious where they were going. Everyone had to get ready and give him his well-deserved welcome. Now the train was ready. Alex managed to turn it into a mini tank. Pepe affirms that they used too much fire. The mafia would arrive at any moment. Now it was the farewell of Alex and his family. Alex would do his best to fix the fire. Adam would continue working even when everything seems useless. He will never give up, just as his son had done for him. His younger brother would also do his part. They would both be fine. A while later, Casey tells Pepe what Chuz said. They should go to Hakeem, the city where Dr. Roxanne was. Maybe with that doctor he could find Casey's mother. The area of chaos changed all the time. One day you had a route, the next day the route disappeared or was altered. I could only assure you that they would arrive in less than a month if they didn't run into any inconvenience. There was a hiding place that Alex knew of, although it was highly sought after by the mafias. That is, very dangerous. Now they were just entering the war zone of the territory of chaos, and the problems were already making themselves felt. Now they had reached the mafia's hideout. Out of nowhere a man was blown up. It was a Tigress, who was hunting test subjects. This subject hurt Tigress's family. She wanted information from her boss. According to the guy following the tracks, he would find the boss of all of them. Tigress turns her back on him. The subject tries to attack her, but she eliminates him without much effort. In one fell swoop bang. The protagonist talks with Tigress. She was glad that he had found his determination. Also, she needed a train, and they needed a super warrior. In the train, Tigress asks Casey why she wanted to reach the upper zone. For Casey to find her mother, and returning fire to the world was their only reason. In the end, everyone had their reasons. Even Tigress wanted to go there and settle accounts. At the beginning of the exhaustion shock, the mafias compared the trained people with the common ones to see the differences. Families like hers were kidnapped and forced to take the pill. Her father, the most strong at that time, was a victim of many. Before becoming a monster and hurting her treasure, her father decided to commit suicide. The strongest made fun of her situation, and she would take care of burying them all without a trace. Suddenly the train stops. The main character goes down and listens how they were coming behind them. There weren't hundreds. There were thousands. They came from all directions. They must have been moving very fast. They could already be seen. It wasn't just the mafia. The ADF, they were also here. Pepe yells that there was a wooden bridge a little further on. After crossing it, they could destroy it. They throw a rock right on top of it, but Tigress blows it to pieces and gets rid of some subjects. However, there was a problem. The bridge was destroyed. Alex asks Tigress to enter. Rai makes the train travel at maximum speed. Now we are in the air. With Casey's fire, Alex felt that he could create anything. Even so, it didn't end. They were exposed. They were an easy target. The protagonist wanted to jump. Now they were less subject if they had to fight. Tigress agreed. Pepe tells them where they would be and where they could go back up. So the main character and Tigress jump off the train. There were several subjects and monsters among them. The main character was starting to go crazy to kill them all, but Tigress stopped him. He had to calm down and not let his emotions seize him. He had to do it through his will. A peaceful but 100% determined state of mind, Tigress dodges the giant's blows, holds onto his neck and immobilizes him. For the main character, Rai thought about his mother, how he would like it for her to see how strong her son has become, capable of protecting the people he loves. Out of nowhere a subject appears in Tigress's blind spot. The protagonist crushes him in an instant. Tigress releases the giant monster. The protagonist, he separates his tentacles and asks, "Someone like you, how strong is he in the upper zone?" The giant replies that there was no other monster more powerful than him. The protagonist copies the technique of Gray, and being in the third level makes everything fly in pieces. Tigress asks him if he used any technique to dispel the monster's attack. In reality, he just endured it, and now he knew how strong he was. Now he had to finish off Sakin. Now they needed to return. The protagonist was surprised at Tigress for not ending the monster herself. Tigress did it with the intention that the protagonist could evolve. Now for him, she was an incredible teacher. Although Tigress was a red belt, she was not allowed to teach. They finally returned to the train. Pepe said that to reach the upper area of Hakeem, they had to advance 3 days in the ocean. Tigress gets on the balloon to be able to train a little. The protagonist also wanted to train. On the other hand, in the disaster that deaths left the team, the news began to spread. The ADF and even Dr. Roxanne were already aware of what was happening. Okay guys, this has been all for today. We are in Cap 57. The name of the manhwa is Shock of Exhaustion. If you liked the video, subscribe for more content. Thank you very much and see you in the next one.